At my cousin's engagement party, she raised her glass and smirked. Some people chase danger instead of love. Everyone laughed. Even my aunt added, Emery found stability, something Sienna never will. I stayed quiet, swallowing the sting. Then a man's voice cut through the music. Jasper Reed, a war correspondent, said, "Funny, I knew Sienna's work overseas, while Emery was busy hiding secrets in Iraq." The laughter died instantly. Glasses froze mid-air, and in that silence I felt every eye on me, no longer the forgotten cousin, but the one holding the truth. I'm Sienna Marlowe, and this is my story, one I never thought I'd have to tell out loud. Before I share it with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Comment hi below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes, knowing someone is out there listening makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story touches you in any way, please consider subscribing. It helps me know I'm not shouting into the void, and maybe together we can remind others that truth matters. The morning light in Greenwich was softer than Brooklyn's, like everything here had been filtered through wealth and old money. I sat at the Brew Haven, the artsy cafe wedged between designer boutiques, stirring my coffee, while Nora studied me from across the table. She looked radiant, even casual, with her hair tied in a loose bun and camera slung at her side. "You don't have to go, you know," she said gently. "It's Emery's circus. Not yours." I sighed, tracing the rim of my mug. She's family. And if I don't go, it'll only give them more ammunition. They already think I've abandoned the idea of a normal life. I almost laughed at that word, normal. For me, normal had been Sandstorm's checkpoints, and the silence after an explosion. I admitted to Nora the thing I rarely said out loud. Every time I'm around them, I feel like I disappear. Like nothing I've done matters because I didn't choose the right boxes to check marriage, stability, kids. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. But I won't dull myself down to be acceptable. Nora leaned forward, squeezing my hand. Then don't. Bring your truth into that place. Don't let them erase you. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Margaret, my aunt and Emery's ever-loyal mother. "Don't dress too rugged. This is Emery's day." My stomach knotted. I locked the screen, already knowing what I'd do. That evening, I'd wear a simple dress, but I would pin my Syria press badge on the strap. Not for attention, never that, but as my own private declaration. Nora brightened suddenly. "Before the party, stop by the gallery. I've set up a small exhibit of your photos. Just 20 minutes. Some interesting people will be there." I hesitated, instantly wary. "Nora, you know how that will look. Emery will accuse me of stealing her thunder." "It's not about her," she shot back. "It's about your work being seen." After a long pause, I nodded. "Fine. 20 minutes. Back at my Brooklyn apartment, I prepared Emery's engagement gift, a limited-run book of my war photos wrapped in linen, a handwritten note tucked inside. "I wish you joy in the truth you build together," I wrote. Then crossed it out, softened it, and settled on May. "You cherish the real, not just the perfect." I let my eyes roam across my walls. Maps, clippings, photos, reminders of lives caught mid-breath in chaos. This cramped apartment was no mansion on the water, but it was mine. It was real. A memory pulled me back to childhood summers in Greenwich, me under a tree, with a stack of adventure books, Emery twirling dolls for an audience of doting adults. She had always been the golden child, basking in applause. I had been the girl in the shade, dreaming of worlds far beyond Connecticut. Now, years later, I locked the door, holding my press badge like an anchor. Tonight, I told myself I wouldn't erase who I was. I'd walk into their polished world carrying the truth they pretended didn't exist. As I drove toward Greenwich City, grit gave way to manicured hedges and gated estates. When I reached the Sterling property, lanterns were already glowing, though the sun was still up, testing their shine for later. I slowed at the gate, heart tightening. It felt like a story was being staged here, one that never had a role written for me. The Sterling estate spread out like something from a glossy magazine lake water, catching the light white fabric fluttering over tables the words, Emery and Wyatt forever, scripted across a banner. Guests floated around in floral dresses and tailored suits, every detail curated for photographs. And then there was me, in my plain dress with a press badge glinting on my shoulder. Heads turned. Emery reached me first, her lips curving in that half-smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "I almost thought you wouldn't come," she said, voice pitched just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You're always chasing breaking news somewhere." Margaret joined in, glowing with pride as she admired the decor. "Isn't it wonderful Emery has such a gift? She's planned everything flawlessly, and she's found the perfect man too." Her words landed like a deliberate exclusion, her eyes sliding right over me as if I were wallpaper. I drifted toward the cocktail bar, catching whispers as I passed. "She's still single. That job of hers. Dangerous, unstable. Who would settle down with that?" My chest tightened, but I forced my fingers to graze the press badge, a silent reminder of why I carried it. At the gift table, I handed over my wrapped book. The attendant looked uncertain, murmuring, "I'll have to check with the list before displaying this." She gave me an apologetic smile, but I noticed the hesitation, as if Emery had already laid down rules. I let it go, but tucked the moment away. Needing air, I slipped into the garden. The lake shimmered, lanterns swaying above. I sank onto a stone bench, the chatter fading behind me. For a moment, memories rushed in dusty roads in Afghanistan, the sound of mortars in the distance, the strange peace of knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be, even if it could cost your life. That felt truer than this entire stage set of perfection. A small voice startled me. "Are you the lady who takes pictures where the sky is smoky and orange?" I turned to find a girl with curious eyes, Lila, 9 years old. I smiled for the first time that day. "Yes, places where people cry too." She pressed a crimson maple leaf into my hand. "Keep this. It's pretty. Like your pictures." My chest softened. Across the lawn, I noticed a man watching her approach, a broad-shouldered figure in simple clothes, presence quiet yet unmistakably shaped by something harder than suburbia. He didn't speak, but I recognized the posture of someone who'd stood on the same ground I had. Jasper Reed, though I didn't know yet how entwined he was in Emery's past. Emery breezed by her perfume, a sharp contrast to the cool evening air. Her eyes flicked to my badge. "Still wearing that? A little harsh for a party, don't you think?" I met her gaze evenly. "It reminds me who I am." Her smile faltered just for a heartbeat. Back inside, I caught sight of a planning board pinned near the catering station, covered in swatches and images. My pulse skipped when I recognized one, a cropped version of my war photo soldiers carrying a wounded boy labeled as color inspiration. Beneath it, Source Emery's Team Collection. My jaw tightened. They had taken my image, stripped it of context, turned it into an aesthetic mood board. I forced myself to breathe, storing the anger deep. This wasn't the moment, but it was the first cut. Later, as servers circulated, I skimmed the evening's event timeline. A gap caught my eye. Surprise toast. Guest of bride. No name. I felt a chill. Who was going to speak, and what would they say? I tucked Lila's leaf into my purse, grounding myself. That's when my phone buzzed. Nora again. "Gallery's ready. If you can swing by." A few interesting people showed up. I looked back toward the mansion, laughter spilling from its perfect edges, and then at the glowing screen. For once, I didn't ask permission. I made my decision. The gallery sat a short walk from the lake, windows darkened to hold the light inside like a held breath. Nora met me at the door with paint on her wrist and that fierce grin that always made me braver. The room was dim, except for tight beams on the prints. Syria, Afghanistan, Gaza images that still lived under my skin. No captions padded the truth, only dates and a line or two to anchor context. The first photograph people stopped at was the mother in a smoke-choked street, her cheek pressed to her child's hair, as if she could shield him with touch alone. Murmurs rose and fell, careful and reverent. Someone asked about lines, when to shoot, and when to lower the camera. I said what I always say, plain and direct. I had consent, and I give back by telling the story exactly as it was. Anything less is theft. The room went quiet in a way that felt like respect, not politeness. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Margaret near the far wall, standing smaller than I'd ever seen, her hands clasped, eyes unsettled rather than dismissive. She didn't come over. She just looked from one frame to the next, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of her with the niece she'd filed under difficult and inconvenient. Nora slid in like a shield and a bridge, introducing me to two curators and a reporter from a regional paper, underscoring process and integrity, the things you can't fake. The attention shouldn't have mattered, but it did. It was the kind of regard my family never granted me, offered here by strangers who only knew the work and what it cost. I felt a presence before I heard the voice. "I know you." I turned and saw him up close, the man from the lawn, older than me by a decade, posture, easy but edged eyes that had learned to read rooms in a heartbeat. "Jasper Reed," he said, extending a hand. "We crossed paths in Iraq. Briefly. You were embedded near Ramadi, weren't you?" The name landed with a quiet shock. I said, pulse ticking faster. He nodded once. "Your photos got passed around the bureau like contraband candy." Then, like slipping a match along the side of a box, he added, "Your cousin worked the press office out there for part of that year. Emery always wore her base credential with a ring that caught the sun. The air changed. She had the ring. Then I asked, careful. She did. Said she was engaged, and she kept company with a reporter after hours. Maybe innocent, maybe not my business, but the base is a fishbowl and people notice things." The floor did a small tilt under my feet. Emery had never mentioned Iraq to the family, not really, and certainly not with a ring on her hand at the time. If she'd been engaged, then she'd been engaged to Wyatt. I didn't say his name. I didn't have to. It sat between us anyway. "You're sure it was Emery?" I asked, meeting his eyes. He didn't hesitate. "No question. She was known for knowing everyone, made herself useful." The words weren't cruel. They were factual, the way reporters talk when they're not filing copy, but they still won't dress a thing prettier than it is. Across the room, Margaret turned slightly as if she'd caught a thread of our exchange. She didn't confront us. She just went still, and I could feel the axis of her certainty slip a degree. Jasper tapped his temple. "I might have group shots from that rotation on an old drive. The ring shows. I'm not promising old tech is a graveyard, but I remember the glare of it in the desert light." The statement wasn't a threat. It was simply a line connecting 2 points. My mind ran ahead, assembling the obvious. If Wyatt didn't know about Iraq, why hide it from the one person it should belong to? I didn't want to imagine the answer yet. There it was, stalking the edges of the room. Before I could respond, a pair of sneakers skidded on the concrete. Lila barreled in, hair escaping its braid cheeks flushed. "Dad." "There are cookies the size of my face," she announced, then noticed me and lit up. "Hi again." She pulled a notebook from her hoodie pocket and slipped the red maple leaf inside my hand with ceremony. "It'll keep better if it's pressed." Little rituals of care offered without calculation. My laugh came out unforced for the first time all day. "Thank you," I said, meaning more than the leaf. When the gallery thinned, I stepped back to the doorway, the evening fading into a quiet blue outside. I touched the cool edge of my press badge and the stem of the leaf, as if they were two ends of a bridge, one to the places where life burned hot and unfiltered, one to a gentler possibility I rarely trusted. I checked the time. Lanterns by the lake would be warming to their full glow now, tables set, courses, cued performances ready. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Tonight will be interesting. No name, no context. I didn't show the message to Nora. I didn't answer. I guided the car along the curving road, the water catching the last of the light. I told myself I wouldn't be the one to set fire to a family's celebration. The truth has its own feet. But if someone tried to back me into a corner, I would not fold. I would stand upright and let whatever was already burning show itself. At the gates, the wind picked up lanterns bobbing as though nodding to a change in pressure. People streamed toward the lawn in their floral armor glasses, chiming smiles pitched just high enough to cover nerves. I parked, inhaled, and stepped back into the story being staged without me ready to let the seams show. By the time I reached the long table, the first course had been cleared, and the light had gone the color of candle wax. The lake lay smooth as glass, and rows of lanterns threw soft halos over linen, roses, and crystal. Emery sat in the center with Wyatt, radiant under the attention she curated so well. Margaret occupied the next seat, posture impeccable, lips a fraction tighter than usual. I took a place near the end beside Jasper and Lila, grateful for the ballast. Emery rose, lifted her glass, and cast a glow over the room that wasn't just lighting. She thanked everyone for coming to celebrate love and stability, savoring the last word like it was a rare dessert. A gentle laugh traveled the table. Someone added too brightly, "Not like some people who can't stay in one place." The comment didn't land by accident. I felt it glance off me, an old bruise pressed by a practiced hand. When the servers moved again, I spoke once, not to perform, but to puncture the idea that safety equals meaning. I described a photograph briefly, a father holding his child after a blast, the way his hands trembled, and then steadied how the world can be falling apart, and still a person will choose to love harder. It wasn't stable, I said evenly, but it was real. The table's noise thinned just for a moment, like a curtain pulled back to show the stagehands working. Then the clatter returned, forced and brittle. I could have left it there. I didn't. I asked a question in the same voice I would use in an interview, the kind that gives a person room to tell the truth if they want it. "Emery," I said, turning so I could see her, "you worked in a press office in Iraq for a stretch, right? Was that when you were already engaged to Wyatt?" The air did that trick again, pulled tight, then held. Emery's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I interned briefly. Nothing worth mentioning." She set her glass down with a click. "And I don't know what you think you're implying." Jasper leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, simply present. "I remember you," he said, addressing Emery directly. "At the base. You wore a ring. People noticed. And you spent a lot of time with one of the bureau guys after hours. Maybe it was nothing, but it was obvious." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple ledger entry read aloud. Wyatt's face did a slow shift I'd seen in soldiers after news arrived from home, confusion first, then the weight of something unwanted settling in. "You never told me you were there?" he said, voice low. Why Emery laughed once, small and wrong. "I didn't think it mattered. It was a blip. And Jasper must be mistaken." Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass until the knuckles paled. "We were all friends. That's how it works in those places." Margaret touched a napkin to her mouth and lowered it carefully. "Emery," she said softly, not a rebuke, yet not support either. A plea to steer gently. For the first time I saw uncertainty ripple across her expression, as if the picture she had poured herself into framing might not hang straight after all. Around us, the party recalibrated. Conversations broke and reformed in pockets. I felt looks hit my skin, some sharp with blame, others prying for spectacle. I kept my eyes on my plate and my voice in my throat. There was nothing to add and nothing to defend. I had asked a question anyone who loved Wyatt should have asked long ago. Let the answers come from where they lived. For a few beats, the only sounds were the water licking the shore and the lantern's faint chime in the shifting air. Then forks moved again, a joke was offered, and died, a chair scraped. I glanced toward the lawn and caught the scene as if framed Margaret watching her daughter in profile, Wyatt studying his hands like they might hold the missing piece, Emery staring down the table toward me with a smile that cut. When dessert plates were lifted and coffee poured, I felt a presence at my shoulder. Margaret stood there, surface calm eyes threaded with something raw. "Walk with me," she said, not quite a request. I rose, meeting Jasper's brief nod and "I've got Lila" gesture, and followed Margaret through the spill of lamplight into the garden, where the noise faded and the dark was honest. Moonlight silvered the lawn as Margaret led me down the flagstone path, away from the clink of glass and choreographed laughter. Cicadas rasped in the hedges. Lanterns shivered in the breeze. She didn't speak until the noise from the party softened into a murmur. Then she turned, arms folded as if she needed help holding herself together. "You've made a mess of things," she said, voice taut. "This is Emery's day." I kept my hands at my sides. I asked a question. I didn't manufacture the answer. Her expression pinched, offended, but underneath it, afraid. For a beat, she seemed to sort through a drawer of prepared lines and find none that fit. "You always push," she said more quietly. "You refuse the easy path, and then you expect the rest of us to pretend that isn't disruptive." "I refuse to pretend at all," I said. "That's the difference." She looked past me toward the black mirror of the lake. "I went to the gallery," she murmured almost to herself. "I didn't plan to. I thought it would be gruesome, exploitative, but it wasn't. It was reverent. It was—" her voice snagged. "I saw people seeing you. Not the girl who makes things difficult, a woman with purpose." The words knocked something loose in my chest. I held very still, afraid that if I moved, the moment would evaporate. Margaret's shoulders dropped by a fraction. "Emery was always easy," she said. "Neat edges, pretty outcomes. You were not easy. You were sharp. And I mistook your sharpness for danger instead of precision." She swallowed, and when she looked at me again, I recognized something I'd long ago stopped hoping for. "I've protected the wrong things, Sienna. I wanted safety so badly I didn't notice when it turned us all into cowards." I had a reply, dry, defensive, lined up out of habit. It died before it reached my mouth. For once, there was nothing to win. Only the ache of being seen late, but seen nonetheless. Her voice thinned. "You said you didn't fabricate anything." "I believe that." She took a breath that sounded like surrender. "And I know I've been unfair. I told myself you didn't need approval because you'd reject it anyway. But that was an excuse. I'm proud of you." The last words seemed to cost her, not because she didn't mean them, but because she did. Heat stung my eyes. I nodded, once the smallest bow I could manage without breaking. "Thank you," I said, and the words ran deeper than politeness. A shadow moved at the edge of the lawn. Emery stood half in the dark, face pale with fury, watching us as if we'd handed each other a weapon. Her gaze flashed quick and cutting before she vanished back toward the house. Margaret reached for my forearm, a careful touch, then let go. "I don't know what happens next," she said, "but I know it needs to be honest." She turned toward the light's shoulders, squared the way you do when you decide to stop pretending. I followed, carrying the quiet of the garden inside my chest like a warm coal. We were almost to the patio when the music spiked and laughter splintered in a way that sounded brittle, like a window webbing. In the corner of my eye, I saw Jasper lift a hand to Lila, signaling, "Stay where you are." The night felt newly fragile, as if the celebration were a soap bubble drifting too close to a candle. Emery intercepted me at the edge of the terrace, smile lacquered eyes bright with heat. A word she said, and didn't wait for consent. The garden's tenderness folded behind me like a page turned, leaving only the sting of what waited. She steered me to the far corner of the backyard where the hedges were high and the lighting mercifully uneven. Guests pretended not to notice, which meant they noticed everything. Emery faced me head on, jaw tight. "You had to make it about you," she said, voice low and vicious behind the pretty smile. You and your tragedies and your grim little badge. Jasper was being polite. No one here is impressed. They feel sorry for you. I kept my voice steady. No one asked for pity. I asked for truth. Her laugh was a small, hard thing. Truth. Please. You live for scenes like this. Anything to remind people you're the brave one and the rest of us are shallow. She stepped in the scent of her perfume, crisp and expensive. I built something stable and beautiful, and you couldn't stand it. You built something glossy, I said. Gloss doesn't hold under heat. Her gaze flicked to my shoulder. That badge looks pathetic at a party, like a costume. The words were meant to wound. They mostly missed. It's not for you, I said. It's for me. A server hurried past with a tray and paused uncertain. Over his shoulder, I glimpsed the gift table, a curated spread of wrapped boxes and bows, a shrine to appearances. I didn't see the linen-wrapped book I'd given hours earlier. Where's my gift? I asked the attendant who doubled back to refill ice. She hesitated, cut a glance toward Emery, and lowered her voice. I was told to put a few items aside, to avoid clutter. I can retrieve it later if needed. Her politeness wasn't enough to cover the fact that an instruction had come from somewhere. I didn't press. I didn't need to. The absence explained itself. Of course, Emery said sweetly. We're streamlining the display. You of all people should understand editing. Editing isn't erasing, I said. Hiding my work doesn't make it go away. A step scuffed on the flagstone behind us. Wyatt had wandered within earshot, hands in his pockets, face drawn. Why would you hide a gift? He asked Emery, simple and direct. No accusation yet, but a fatigue that sounded older than the evening. Emery blinked, choosing her tone with care. It's being kept safe. The table is very full. His gaze stayed on her a second too long, as if measuring the size of the gap between what she said and what felt true. Jasper approached, not looming, just present, grounding the air. I can look for those old group shots, he said evenly, to no one and everyone. If it helps clear the fog? Emery's face lost a shade of color. There's no need to dredge up ancient. She caught herself recalibrated. It's irrelevant. Then it won't hurt to have clarity, I said. I kept my tone even, my pulse steady by force. Around us, conversation rippled, stalled, resumed gossip disguised as concern. Guests who had happily chuckled at the earlier dig about my so-called instability were now watching Emery with the same hungry curiosity. I felt the shift as a physical thing, the way a stadium tilts when the play heads the other direction. Emery's composure cracked a fraction. She leaned toward me again, voice gone raw. You are a nomad with a camera, Sienna. That's not a life. That's a delay. No one wants to anchor themselves to someone who never lands. She said it loud enough that it carried beyond the shrubbery. A few heads turned. A woman at the nearest table blushed and looked away, as if she'd been caught listening at a door. I let the words pass through me. I thought of the mother in the smoke of the father's steadied hands, of the leaf in my purse, and the woman in the garden who had finally told me I was seen. You don't have to want my life, I said, but your dislike doesn't make it less real. Wyatt rubbed a hand over his face. Why didn't you tell me about Iraq? The question came out tired, not theatrical. Emery recoiled as if the syllables had heat. It was brief. I told you about countless events. That one slipped. He looked at her, and in his silence I heard all the things partners say between words. This matters to me because it mattered to you then. Why hide what could have been ordinary if it were only ordinary? A small chorus of clinks and murmurs rose from the patio. Someone laughed too loudly, then stopped. The evening's choreography had lost its cues. Jasper shifted his weight the way people do when they've decided to stay until something lands where it should. Lila watched from a distance, worry pulling at her mouth. I caught her eye and tried for a smile. She returned a ghost of one brave and thin. Emery's voice sharpened again, the sweetness stripped away. You think evidence changes anything? You think a photo of a ring means you get to rewrite my relationship? Her breathing went shallow. You humiliated me tonight. The irony of that settled between us heavy. I hadn't stood to make a speech. I hadn't stormed a microphone. I had asked a single question, the kind that knocks on a door you've kept locked and waits for you to open it yourself. I felt Margaret before I saw her, the perfume and the steadiness. She stopped beside Wyatt, eyes moving carefully from his face to her daughter's. She didn't intervene, not yet. But she didn't shield either. The shift was almost imperceptible and colossal at once. Emery saw it and flinched as if a familiar hand had been withdrawn mid-step. I looked past my cousin to the lake. In the lantern light, the water showed every ripple. You could pretend all you wanted that a surface was smooth. One pebble contradicted you. I'm not here to take anything from you, I said. I'm here because you made me a story I don't recognize and expected me to play along. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The server returned, cheeks pink, the linen-wrapped book cradled in both hands. Should I put this on the table now? He asked, not looking at Emery. He must have found where it had been stashed. I nodded. Thank you. He started toward the gifts, then paused, reading the moment as clearly as any adult in the room. It deserves to be seen, he said softly, almost like a wish, and went. The sound that left Emery could have been a laugh or a sob, if either had been allowed in her script. She drew herself up. Fine, she said, brittle as spun sugar. Let everyone look. Let them gawk at suffering and call it art. It doesn't make you better than me. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The measure was never me against her art, against event risk, against comfort. It was whether any of us could stand in daylight without flinching. Wyatt stepped back just a foot, a small retreat that looked like the beginning of a new geometry. Margaret's hand dropped from the fold of her arm to her side, open as if she were ready to feel rather than brace. Jasper exhaled in that quiet way of his that said a weather system had shifted. The music attempted cheer again and failed. I stared at the lanterns and heard the truth humming beneath the polite noise. The evening had moved past the point of denial. Whatever followed would not be decided by speeches or decorations, but by what each of us chose to hold. I was done arguing for my existence. I was done apologizing for my work. I felt the weight of the leaf in my purse, the press badge against my skin, the echo of Margaret's words in the garden. Across the lawn, the gift table gleamed, and somewhere among the satin bows lay a book that had taken years to make pain pressed into paper, not for applause but for memory. I turned toward the patio, raising my chin to meet the lights. Behind me, the hedge whispered, and in front of me, the celebration faltered, honest at last in its unevenness. It was no longer possible to hide the fracture lines. And with that knowledge came something like calm. By the time dessert plates were cleared, the table had settled into a fragile quiet. Guests tried to keep conversations alive, but every laugh sounded forced, every fork scraping china too loudly. The lake shimmered beneath a net of lantern light, reflecting a celebration that felt more like a waiting room before bad news. I could feel eyes sliding toward Emery and Wyatt, then away, as if everyone sensed a storm on the horizon but didn't want to name it. A member of Emery's planning team rose to make a toast clearly assigned to the mysterious surprise slot on the timeline. She stumbled through a few compliments about Emery's flair for design and her vision for the wedding, but then, with a nervous smile, she let slip. And let's not forget her adventures abroad, like her time in Iraq. The words hung in the air like a dropped plate. All motion stopped. The silence deepened until Jasper pushed his chair back and stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I was there, he said, tone calm, but unmistakably final. At the base. Emery wore her engagement ring every day even then. People noticed because she spent much of her free time with another correspondent. Maybe it meant nothing, but it was impossible not to see. Chairs shifted, gasps rippled like wind through reeds. Whispers flared from every corner, half disbelief, half hungry curiosity. All around the table, eyes that had been politely attentive now sharpened, measuring the woman at the center of it all. Wyatt's face drained. His voice was quiet, almost tender in its exhaustion. "You never told me you were there. You never told me any of this." Why? It wasn't anger. It was worse, disappointment heavy enough to bruise. Emery's laugh came out brittle, splintering in the night air. It was nothing. A brief stint barely worth remembering. Jasper must have confused me with someone else. Her hand trembled as she tried to lift her wine glass. The stem slipped, and the glass toppled red, spilling across the white linen like blood spreading through gauze. She froze, staring at the stain blooming wider and wider, unable to catch it. Margaret reached across the table, her napkin poised but useless against the flood. She didn't look at the wine, though. She looked at her daughter, her voice steady but stripped of its usual certainty. "Enough, Emery. We cannot keep building walls out of things that were never true." The words landed with the weight of a gavel. Emery opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came. Her lips pressed tight as her gaze darted between Wyatt's broken stare and the guest's relentless curiosity. I sat still, my hands folded, not triumphant, not gloating. I felt the weight sliding from my shoulders as if I had been carrying something that never belonged to me. I hadn't raised my voice or begged to be believed. The truth had walked in on its own and seated itself at the head of the table. The lanterns swayed above us, light shifting across faces that would never see Emery as flawless again. The party had ended, though no one had yet admitted it. People lingered out of politeness, but the script had burned away. I knew then Emery would come for me before the night was over, desperate to reclaim the story. But for the first time, the narrative no longer lived in her hands. The lawn was nearly empty when I stepped away from the wreckage of the evening. The air had cooled sharp enough to remind me I was still alive and standing. Emery appeared from the shadows, her perfect makeup smeared at the corners, eyes wild. She caught my arm nails, pressing crescents into my skin. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "This was supposed to be mine." I pulled free, steady. "I didn't ruin anything. The truth did. You can hate me for it, but it was never mine to carry." Her breath shook, and for once, she had no script. She turned and walked back toward the house, shoulders heaving, a figure unraveling under her own weight. Across the terrace, Wyatt stood apart, speaking to her in a voice low and clipped. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the truth of them in his face. The warmth had drained, replaced by doubt that wouldn't leave. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It was the crack in a foundation that had looked unshakable hours earlier. Margaret approached quietly, her hands twisting a napkin she must have carried from the table. She studied me with eyes stripped of the defenses she'd always worn. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "I told myself your choices were reckless, that your life was chaos. But tonight I saw you hold still when the rest of us flinched. I saw courage where I used to see inconvenience. I'm sorry it took me this long to admit I'm proud of you." I didn't trust my voice, so I only nodded, letting her words settle into the cracks of old wounds. It was late and too much had broken for quick repair, but it was something. For the first time, she had met me without judgment. A small figure darted toward me, clutching something in her hand. Lila pressed a sticker against my palm, a camera drawn in bright colors. "You should take more beautiful pictures," she said, eyes earnest. I laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and light. "I'll try," I promised, tucking it safely away. Jasper joined us, his presence calm, unhurried. "I'm working on a new project," he said. "Conflict zones, but through the lens of recovery. I could use another eye, if you're interested." I hesitated, my instinct to refuse rising, but then quieted. For the first time in a long while, the idea of partnership didn't feel like a trap. It felt like possibility. By the time I returned to Brooklyn, dawn had cracked the sky, spilling pale gold through my apartment windows. The city stirred below, indifferent and alive. I set down my bag, unpinned my press badge, and placed it beside the crimson leaf Lila had given me. Together, they looked like an emblem: pride and hope, memory and promise. I leaned back against the wall, breathing in the quiet of my space. The world outside still measured women by stability, still applauded perfection over truth. But here, in this small apartment, lined with photographs of people who had survived the worst, I felt no need to chase anyone's approval. Emery could cling to appearances. Margaret could wrestle with regret. Wyatt would decide what to do with his fractured trust. None of that determined my worth. I smiled, small but sure. I didn't need the noise of vindication. I didn't need a stage or a spotlight. The quiet was enough. The truth was enough. And so was I.